This video tutorial goes over a project that I call the Warhol Project because it mimics some pop art techniques used by a famous artist named Andy Warhol. But some tools and features that it's going to focus on in Adobe Photoshop is applying filters to photos to change their appearance very quickly, utilizing the brush tool with some different aspects of that tool and changing the properties of that tool, applying color modes to some layers in a Photoshop document, and we're going to work in some proper layer management, organizing layers correctly, and then also some file management on your computer. The first thing we need to do is find an image of a person. We're going to use a person as the subject of this project. It could be a self-portrait of yourself. It could be an image of a famous person. It could be an image of a relative. Whatever it is, we need a picture of a person from about their shoulders up. So I have a picture of Steve Jobs here, one of the co-founders of Apple. And again, it's his head, it's his shoulders. I have his hand with the phone in there as well. But this is kind of the general look we're going for. Not a real full body shot, but kind of just their head and their appearance overall. To start out, we're going to convert this image, something that looks like it was taken from a camera. We're going to convert it to what looks like kind of like a sketch or a black and white rendition of this photo. And we're going to do that very quickly and easily by applying filters. And there's a lot of different filters in Photoshop. We're going to kind of look around at those. Before we go starting to look at filters, you want to make sure that the default colors are selected in Photoshop, and that's that default black and white down here in our toolbar. We want to make sure that those colors are chosen. That's going to affect the way some of the filters work. So make sure you have those selected. You can get there either by clicking this smaller set of black and white boxes, or by pressing the D button on your keyboard will bring out default colors as well. And once we have those, we're going to go to the top menu and find filter. And inside of this menu, third option down, we have a filter gallery. And the filter gallery is good because it will show us really what all these different filters look like, as you can click through and kind of see what these offer, what they kind of look like. They all kind of have a different look about them, different way of changing the picture from its original state into something that is very quickly and easily something very different than what we started. For the purposes of this project, we're going to go under the category called Sketch, and there's a lot of different ones, and notice most of these will be a black and white look to them, and that's where those default colors come in. Had we started with colors that were not black and white, those would be reflected in these. Instead of a black and white graphic pen, it could be a blue and yellow graphic pen had we chose those colors from the beginning. The particular filter that we're going to apply for this project is called the stamp filter. And after you choose that stamp filter, you may need to adjust the properties of this filter with the sliders over here on the right. I always recommend that you move smoothness all the way down to the left to 1. That will bring out the most detail in our photo. That will show a lot more facial features. If smoothness was dragged out to the right, you see everything gets kind of soft. Things start to disappear. When it's all the way down, you start to see a lot more detail in the face and even in the hand and the fingers. And then you'll adjust the light and dark balance one way or another to kind of get this photo to a place where you can see a lot of detail, but also pick out the main characteristics of the image. And once you get it to a place that looks good, you're going to simply click the OK button, and it will apply that filter. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to use the brush to get rid of anything that may have been in the background of our original photo. This one's pretty easy because There was nothing in the original photo, but kind of an Apple logo that we're going to get rid of, this kind of contour back here and this black background. But if you have a photo that was taken in context, there may be a lot of things back here in the background that you need to get rid of. The only thing we want to keep are the person itself, the hand, in this case, this phone, and the shoulders of the person. So I'm going to get a brush, and I'm going to pull out my white brush and begin to take out the background. Now, a couple things with the brush tool as you're working on this part of the project. We do want to make sure that the hardness value of our brush is all the way at 100%. That will ensure that we have a nice, crisp, smooth edge rather than a soft airbrush. So make sure that value is set at 100. And then, in this case, this small brush isn't doing me any good work because it's going to take me a long time to get rid of everything. So making your brush size bigger will help you out in this case, and you can do that either by going up here to this drop down menu and increasing the size that way, or if you look at your keyboard, there are two bracket keys right above the enter button. The left bracket will make my brush size smaller, and the right bracket will make my brush size bigger, and that's going to come in handy as we continue this project. So using those brackets will really speed up your workflow as we continue. And I'm going to get rid of all this background. I'm going to be sure to kind of leave an outline of the head of Steve Jobs. Kind of use your best estimate to get all of the background out of here. Something to keep in mind as you're doing this, it is a good idea to keep a black line around the entire outline or perimeter of this picture of Steve Jobs. So you can see around his head, I've kept like a little thin black line around his head to kind of frame him out in cases where that line may never be there. And I'm referring to right here on his forehead and even around his hand. It would be a good idea, and it's going to help you out in the future of this project to go ahead and add that line. So I'm actually going to shrink my brush size down and then get the black out and actually attempt to add those lines back in there. It's going to save you a lot of time when you continue on some other parts of this project. So use a best estimate. Any lines that are gone, you may want to use a brush to bring back in to give yourself that perimeter to work with, and you'll see why that's going to save you some time in the future. So what I have here is that same image. I have gone ahead and cut out the background. I have added that black line where necessary to really give myself a good starting point to begin to continue this project. Once you have applied that stamp filter, you've cut out the background, and you've used a small black brush to fill in any lines that would be necessary to give yourself a good starting point, we're going to go ahead and save this as a JPEG. So I'm going to go to File, Save As. And I'm actually going to make a new folder called Warhol. And I'm just going to call this one Steve Jobs 1.jpg. And it could be face 1 or whatever, but I do want to make sure that I'm using the JPEG format and then I'm naming this thing properly. And I'll save that. Once I've got one JPEG saved, this is where some of this file management is going to kick into gear, because we need to go manage some files in the folder that I just created to complete this project. So I'm going to hide Photoshop real quickly. And if I open that folder called Warhol, I see my Steve Jobs 1 JPEG. I'm going to end up wanting 6 different JPEGs of this same thing. So to do that, I'm going to, one way or another, on a Mac, I can right click and duplicate, and I'm going to name that one Steve Jobs 2. You may have to copy and paste it. If I grabbed it like this, I could copy and then paste it right back in there as well. But you're going to just keep on with that process and do it several times over until you get 6 different versions or 6 copies of that original JPEG that we just made with the stamp filter and the adjusting the border and the outline of that image. Okay, so here's my 6 individual JPEGs, and you'll discover in towards the end of this project why we need 6 of them. But to start out, I'm going to go ahead and open one of these JPEGs in Photoshop. Here's my JPEG of the black and white stamp, and I'm going to begin to add color to this black and white sketch. To do that, to add anything to this JPEG, I'm going to need a new layer. So at the bottom of my layer palette down here, I'm going to click the little sticky note button that's going to make myself a new layer. With my brush tool, I'm going to choose a color, and it's always a good idea for the purposes of this project to choose a very bright color. Andy Warhol, if you're familiar with any of his work, use very bright colors. So I'm going to choose a bright green, and I'm going to adjust my brush size and begin adding color. Now, it would be extremely difficult if I'm going to paint Steve Jobs' face right now. It would be extremely difficult for me to go through here with a brush and avoid all of the black detail in his face, but still get the white part colored. As I would go over the black, notice it makes all of it disappear and I lose the details of his face. That is not what I want to happen. So we're going to use what are called color modes to help ease this process and make the adding color a lot easier and a lot quicker, and it's going to end up looking a lot better in the long run. So after I've made this new layer, I want to immediately change the color mode of that layer, and that's found directly above it. There's a drop down menu that currently says normal. The one that works best for this project is called multiply. Excuse me. What that'll do is, if I put that layer into multiply, now as I add color, it will not get rid of the black detail in Steve Jobs' face, but it will allow me to color in all of the white and get rid of the white. That will save a lot of time when you're adding color to these photos. And using the brush tool is an easy way to do this. Very easy way to add color to one of the parts of this picture. And really, you want to choose a particular area of the image and put a bunch of color in that one area. So I'm making his entire face green. I'm actually going to make his neck green as well. And remember, I can go right over the black and it will not affect anything. And that would be adding color to one part. I would switch colors, maybe get yellow, color his hand yellow, continue that fashion as we add color to each of these. Now, when we made the stamp of this image, I suggested to go around the border and add in a black line to give yourself a good outline of your image and give a border around the edges. And that's because this background needs to be colored in as well. Now, I could simply get a color and use my brush, increase the brush size, and add color to the background. But since I have a good black line around the border, I can go grab my magic wand tool, click in the background. It gives me that entire background. And now I have dancing ants. I have a selection around just my background, and I can either use a brush to paint in there, and it only gets the background, or if I hold the Alt button down and hit delete on my keyboard, it will fill that area with color. And I'm expecting you to add color to every part of the image. I still have some white here on the phone. I still have some white here on the shirt. So you're going to grab different bright colors from your color palette over here on the right and just add color until all of these white areas are covered. And I have an example of what I'm looking for here. All of my areas have color. They're all colored in. It looks like a good rendition of a Warhol. Now, that first version is done. That JPEG 1 that with the number 1 is done. So I'm going to file save as. I'm going to make this a Photoshop file and save it as Steve Jobs 1's PSD, not JPEG in this case, but a Photoshop document. Go ahead and save that. And I'm done with my first version. What I'll do next is I'm ready to start number 2. I'm going to go grab number 2 JPEG, open it in Photoshop, make a new layer, and change my color mode to multiply, and I'm going to go do the same exact process of what I did for the first one. Add color to all the areas, fill it up with color, and get it done. You're going to continue that process until you get all 6 of those JPEGs with color. So you're going to end up with basically one JPEG, one PSD with color. A JPEG of white, a PSD of color, a JPEG of white, a PSD of color, so on and so forth until you get all 6 of them done. When you have all 6 of your PSDs with color, you need to get one of those opened in Photoshop. So I have my first one opened in Photoshop. It's ready to go. And what I'm going to do is just extend the canvas size of this entire project and assemble these into a grid fashion. And if you're familiar with any of Andy Warhol's work, that's kind of the technique that he used as well. He would have a grid of the same image repeated with different color schemes to give like a pop art feel. So what we need to do with one of these renditions open, I'm going to go to the top menu, go to image and canvas size. I'm going to extend my canvas size out big enough to add the rest of my PSDs with color for a final project. I'm going to change my unit here to %. That's going to make the math a little bit easier to figure all this out. And I'm going to extend my width long enough to include 3 in the first row of these JPEGs. So right now it's at 100. Room enough for 3 would equal 300%. I want enough to have 2 rows. So right now my height is 100. I'm going to extend it enough to add 1 more. That makes it 200%. And then finally, I'm going to adjust my anchor point. Right now, my anchor point is right in the center. That means if I were to extend this canvas right now, my original, this blue and green and yellow one behind this box right now, would be right in the center of the canvas. And that will not fit in with the grid that we're trying to create. So I'm going to change my anchor point to be the top left. That way, my canvas will extend out to the right, it will extend out to the bottom, and it'll give enough room and it'll look good with all the rest of the 6. So once I've changed to 300%, 200% height, and adjust my anchor point to the top left, I'm going to click OK. And if I zoom out here, you'll see I now have enough canvas or blank space to add the rest of those JPEGs that I've already added color to. I'm going to go to File, Place, number 2 that I've colored. I'm going to place it and move it into its spot. And you'll notice as you're doing this, Photoshop will kind of help snap it into place where it needs to be. So I'm gonna, once I get it into place, I'll hit Enter. I'll go File, Place, and find my next one and move it to where it needs to go. Hit Enter and continue this process until I have all 6 of them added. Got one more. Okay. So here is the finished version of this project with all 6 of my colored JPEGs assembled in this grid fashion. And this is exactly what a Warhol project needs to look like when you are done. Some things that I'm going to be looking for when I grade this are really just errors with the assembly. If there's any misalignment with the assembly of what I just did, it should be a nice clean grid. I'm going to be taking points off for that. And also the coloring job. And if you were looking closely, you can see that in places like right here on his hand, and especially over here on his hand, and around the edges of this paint job, there's some little bleeding of purple over there, and especially his hand that's missing color. I'm going to be looking around the edges of the paint job to make sure that it's nice and clean and accurate. So please pay attention to that as you're adding color to your JPEGs. Once this whole project has been assembled, we're going to File, Save As, make sure it's a JPEG, and make sure you have named it properly. Save it in the right spot, and you're going to submit that JPEG for grading.